Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment by Kahneman, Olivier, Sibony, and Sunstein. Picture yourself as a refugee for just a moment. You've escaped your homeland, running from persecution, violence, or something genuinely horrifying. You've gambled everything to reach America's shores, desperately hoping for asylum and a fresh start. Now, your entire future hangs in the balance, completely dependent on a single judge's decision. Here's the kicker. You're part of a lottery you never even knew existed. A fascinating study on asylum cases uncovered something jaw-dropping. If your case file randomly lands on one judge's desk, your chances of admission might be as low as 5%. But if Lady Luck smiles and assigns you to a different judge in the exact same building, your odds could skyrocket to 88%. Let that sink in for a second. Same laws, same facts, same country, but your outcome swings wildly, depending on pure chance. The researchers didn't mince words when they titled their study Refugee Roulette. Now, before you start thinking this is about corrupt or prejudiced judges, hold that thought. This is actually about something far sneakier and way more widespread. It's a fundamental flaw in how humans make judgments, and it affects absolutely everyone. From courtrooms to hospitals, corporate boardrooms, to your personal decisions about what to have for dinner. Today we're diving into a game-changing book called Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment. The authors are basically the Avengers of behavioral science, led by Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. If that book exposed our predictable mental biases, then Noise is the mind-blowing sequel, revealing the other half of the human error story that most people have completely missed. By the time we're done here, I guarantee you'll see the world through new eyes. You'll understand an invisible force that drains billions from companies, triggers catastrophic medical and legal mistakes, and messes with your own decision-making every single day. Once you spot it, you can actually fight back. Understanding noise isn't just intellectual gymnastics. It's like unlocking a superpower for making smarter, fairer, and more accurate decisions. Ready to explore the surprising world of noise? Let's go. To wrap your head around this hidden judgment flaw, imagine you're at a shooting arcade. 4 teams are taking turns with a rifle, each person firing one shot at a target. Team A is basically perfect. Their shots cluster tightly right around the bullseye. This is the golden standard we're all chasing: accurate and consistent judgment. Now check out Team B. Their shots also cluster tightly together, but they're all consistently off to one side, missing the bullseye in the exact same spot. We have a name for this: bias. Their rifle sight is probably misaligned, creating a systematic error. In thinking terms, this is what we usually talk about when discussing mistakes, looking for that consistent, predictable flaw or prejudice. But then there's Team C. Oh boy. Their shots are scattered absolutely everywhere. On average, they're centered on the bullseye, so there's no obvious bias, but the inconsistency is wild. This random scatter, this unwanted all-over-the-placeness, is what the authors call noise. We know these shooters are struggling, but there's no simple explanation for why they're so unpredictable. Finally, Team D represents the worst possible scenario. They're both biased and noisy. Shots that systematically miss the target and spray everywhere at the same time. This shooting range becomes a powerful lens for understanding human judgment. Bias is that systematic error, like Team B. Noise is the random scatter, like Team C. Both make us miss the bullseye. For decades, we've been obsessed with bias. Thousands of articles and books dissecting it from every angle. But noise, the authors argue, is the silent assassin of good decisions, possibly an even bigger problem that we almost never notice. Here's where it gets really interesting. Flip those targets around and look at them from behind. You can't see the bullseye anymore. You have no idea whether Team A or Team B is more accurate. The bias becomes invisible. But you can still crystal clearly see the scatter. You can immediately tell that Teams C and D are noisy, while Teams A and B are not. This is the secret sauce for understanding noise. You can measure it without even knowing what the right answer is. When doctors disagree on diagnoses for identical symptoms, we can study that disagreement without knowing the actual illness. When film executives give wildly different box office predictions, we can measure that variability without waiting for opening weekend. All we need to do is look at the back of the target. And when we do, the amount of noise we discover is, in the author's words, scandalously high. Take criminal justice, for example. For a long time, judges had enormous discretion, with the thinking that every case was unique and deserved individualized judgment. It seemed humane and thoughtful. But in the 1970s, a courageous judge named Marvin Frankel started noticing shocking inconsistencies. He saw two men with clean records, both convicted of cashing counterfeit checks for tiny amounts. One got 30 days in jail, the other 15 years. Frankel called these arbitrary cruelties perpetrated daily, arguing this was unacceptable in a society governed by laws, not individual whims. He was pointing straight at noise. His outrage sparked a movement. Researchers conducted studies where dozens of federal judges evaluated identical hypothetical cases for sentencing. The results were, as one report described them, astounding. For a single extortion case, sentences ranged from 3 years with no fine all the way to 20 years with a $65,000 fine. For a bank robber, some judges gave 5 years, others 18. Your sentence didn't just depend on your crime. It depended entirely on which judge happened to be on duty that day. This wasn't just about different judicial philosophies. Later studies revealed that noise could come from the most trivial factors imaginable. Judges are tougher right before lunch when they're hungry. They hand down harsher sentences on the Monday after the local football team loses. You're less likely to get asylum on a hot day. These tiny, random factors create what the authors call occasion noise, the variability in the same person's judgments on different occasions. The battle against this judicial lottery led to the U.S. Sentencing Guidelines in 1984, a set of rules designed to restrict sentencing ranges and reduce noise. And guess what? They worked. Multiple studies showed the guidelines significantly cut down variation between judges. But many judges absolutely hated them, feeling they were too mechanical and stripped away their ability to consider each case's unique circumstances. Eventually, in 2005, the Supreme Court made the guidelines merely advisory rather than mandatory. What happened next? The noise came roaring back like a tidal wave. Inter-judge disparities doubled. The lottery was back in full swing. This problem isn't just a government thing. The author's own journey into noise actually started with a large insurance company. They proposed an experiment called a noise audit, having multiple company experts independently price identical fictional insurance policies. Before running the audit, they asked executives how much variation they'd expect between two underwriters. The median guess was 10%. So a premium of $9,500 from one underwriter might be $10,500 from another. Totally reasonable, right? The actual result? The median difference was 55%. That means for a premium one underwriter set at $9,500, another set it at $16,700. The executives were absolutely floored. One senior leader estimated this invisible noise was costing the company hundreds of millions of dollars annually, losing business from prices set too high, and losing money from unprofitable deals priced too low. How does this even happen? How can professionals working in the same office, following the same rules, be so wildly inconsistent without anyone noticing? The authors call this the illusion of agreement. We walk around with something called naive realism, the assumption that we see the world as it actually is, so other reasonable people must see it the same way. The underwriter who quoted $9,500 felt totally confident in her judgment. She respects her colleagues and assumes they'd reach similar conclusions. She never sees the $16,700 quote, because in the real world only one underwriter handles each case. The variability stays completely hidden. Organizations, craving harmony, often design processes that avoid exposing disagreements. The noise is like a slow, steady leak in your basement, costly and damaging, but completely unnoticed until someone specifically goes looking for it with a noise audit. So if noise is everywhere, how do we actually measure its impact? To understand that, we need to think about what error truly means. The authors want us to think of judgment as a form of measurement, where the human mind is the measuring instrument. And like any instrument, it can have two kinds of error: bias and noise. Let's revisit the Good Cell Company, which employs forecasters to predict market share. An audit shows their forecasts for a region are noisy, with a standard deviation of 10 percentage points around the average forecast of 44%. A year later, the actual market share turns out to be 34%. Now we can calculate both bias and noise. The average forecast was 44%, but reality was 34%, so the system has a bias of plus 10 points, too optimistic. The noise, which is the standard deviation of the forecasts, is also 10 points. In this case, bias and noise are equal. Which contributes more to overall error? The answer comes from a beautiful piece of statistics that forms the backbone of the book's argument. Total error, measured as mean squared error, isn't bias plus noise. It's bias squared plus noise squared. Overall error equals bias squared plus noise squared. This equation, which looks just like the Pythagorean theorem, reveals something stunning. Bias and noise are completely interchangeable. Reducing noise by 1 point has exactly the same impact on total error as reducing bias by 1 point. This is profoundly counterintuitive. We naturally think that if our judgments are biased, like those overly optimistic forecasters, the top priority must be correcting that bias. But the math clearly shows that reducing random scatter is equally important. Reducing noise is always beneficial, regardless of how much bias exists. This brings us to a deeper dive into where noise actually comes from. The authors break down system noise into two main components. First is level noise. This is what we typically imagine when thinking about inconsistency. Some judges are just naturally harsher than others across the board. Some doctors are more likely to prescribe medication. Some performance reviewers are easy graders. Others are tough. This reflects differences in their average level of judgment. In the big sentencing study, this variability in judges, general severity accounted for about half the total noise. But the other half, often the larger part, is something called pattern noise. This is where things get really fascinating. Pattern noise refers to the fact that individual judges have unique, idiosyncratic reactions to specific cases. For example, a generally lenient judge might be unusually harsh on white-collar criminals. Another judge might be tough on average but surprisingly sympathetic to a young offender who reminds him of his own son. These unique interactions between the judge and specific case details create unpredictable variations. Your judgment isn't just a function of your general disposition, your level. It's also shaped by how your personal history, values, and experiences interact with the specific facts in front of you. This is your judgment personality. And since everyone's is unique, it creates massive amounts of noise. And within pattern noise, there's that transient component we mentioned earlier, occasion noise. Your mood, the weather, what you ate for lunch. These temporary and completely irrelevant factors create even more variability. So if human judgment is so hopelessly flawed and noisy, what can we actually do about it? The most radical solution is to replace it entirely. For over 60 years, study after study has confirmed a finding that many professionals still find shocking and offensive. Simple algorithms or rules are consistently more accurate at prediction than human experts. In 1954, psychologist Paul Meehl published a book reviewing studies that pitted the clinical judgment of experts against statistical prediction from formulas. The formula almost always won. Why? We like to believe our superiority lies in our subtlety, our ability to see unique patterns in each case that a rigid formula would miss. But research shows this supposed subtlety is mostly just noise. The algorithm's biggest advantage isn't sophistication, it's consistency. It's noise-free. It applies the same rule, the same weights to the same information every single time. A later study pushed this even further, showing that not only does a model of reality beat you, but a model of you beats you. In other words, if researchers statistically analyze your past decisions to create a simple rule mimicking how you judge, that rule will be more accurate than your future decisions. Why? Because the model captures your average wisdom while stripping out the noise, your inconsistencies, random reactions, and mood swings. The caricature actually performs better than the real thing. But we can't and don't want to replace all human judgment with algorithms. So how can we make our own judgments less noisy? The authors propose a brilliant framework they call decision hygiene. It's a wonderful metaphor. When you wash your hands, you don't know which specific germ you're avoiding. You just know it's good practice that prevents a wide range of potential illnesses. Similarly, decision hygiene consists of procedures that reduce noise without you ever knowing which specific error you've prevented. It's an invisible victory against an invisible enemy. So what does this hygiene actually look like in practice? The book explores several powerful techniques. First, sequence information carefully. The tragic case of Brandon Mayfield, the Oregon lawyer wrongly identified as a Madrid train bomber by the FBI, illustrates this perfectly. The fingerprint examiners were influenced by knowing Mayfield was a Muslim convert on an FBI watch list. This contextual information created confirmation bias, leading them to see a match where none existed. The hygiene solution is ensuring that judges, whether they're fingerprint examiners, doctors, or managers, evaluate core evidence before exposure to potentially biasing information. Analyze the fingerprint first, then check if it matches the suspect, never the other way around. Second, select and aggregate judgments. This is wisdom of crowds in action. Averaging multiple independent judgments is mathematically guaranteed to reduce noise. The Good Judgment Project, a massive forecasting tournament, found that the very best forecasters, the so-called super forecasters, weren't just smarter, they were less noisy. They constantly updated their beliefs, thought in probabilities, and actively sought out different perspectives. When these super forecasters worked in teams and aggregated their judgments, their accuracy soared. A key hygiene practice is getting independent opinions and averaging them. Third, use guidelines and structure judgments. The APGAR score, a simple checklist for assessing newborn health, perfectly exemplifies a guideline. Instead of a fuzzy holistic judgment of, is the baby okay, it breaks the decision into 5 simple checks: color, heart rate, reflexes, muscle tone, and respiration. This decomposition reduces ambiguity and noise. The same logic applies to structured interviews for hiring. Unstructured conversational interviews are notoriously poor predictors of job success. Why? Because first impressions create a halo effect, where our overall feeling about a candidate colors our evaluation of their specific skills. A structured interview, where every candidate answers the same questions in the same order and gets rated on predefined scales, is far more predictive because it forces disciplined, consistent evaluation. This leads to the author's master plan, a synthesis of all these hygiene practices called the Mediating Assessments Protocol, or MAP. The core idea is beautifully simple. Treat big decisions like you would a structured interview. Before discussing the final choice, break the decision into a handful of key mediating assessments. For an acquisition, this might be strategic fit, management quality, and synergy potential. Then have your team evaluate each assessment independently, preferably using an outside view, comparing the case to similar past cases. Only after you have a profile of these independent ratings should you allow holistic discussion and intuitive final judgment. The goal is to delay intuition, not ban it. By structuring the process, you ensure all evidence gets fair consideration without contamination from premature conclusions. Of course, reducing noise isn't always easy or cheap. Sometimes rules are too rigid, and we need human discretion to handle unique case particulars and allow our values to evolve. The authors don't argue for a world without judgment. They argue for a world with better judgment. And the first step toward that world is recognizing the invisible enemy of noise. Bias leads to errors and unfairness. Noise does too. Yet we do so much less about it. As we wrap up our journey through noise, I keep coming back to one simple but powerful idea. We're all living in a much more random world than we realize. We love believing that outcomes, a promotion, a diagnosis, a legal verdict, result from clear, logical forces. We search for reasons. We look for bias. But what this book so brilliantly reveals is that so much of what happens to us is just chance, random error, noise. For anyone standing at the threshold of important life decisions, this might sound either terrifying or liberating. Terrifying because it means fairness isn't guaranteed. The grade on your essay might depend on whether your teacher read it before or after lunch. The job offer might depend on one interviewer's idiosyncratic preference. The world isn't just biased, it's a lottery. But it's also incredibly liberating, because once you understand noise's nature, you gain a new form of control. You can't eliminate randomness from the world, but you can build systems in your own life to protect yourself from it. Decision hygiene principles aren't just for big corporations or government agencies. They're thinking tools anyone can use. So how can you start building a less noisy life right now? Let me offer a few simple actions inspired by the book. First, whenever you face an important decision, get second and third opinions independently. Don't ask friends for advice in a group chat where they can see each other's answers. Ask them one by one, before they've been influenced by others. You're not just looking for consensus. You're trying to understand the range of reasonable disagreement. You're conducting your own personal noise audit. Second, always start with the outside view. Say you're figuring out how long to study for a big exam. Your first instinct, the inside view, is thinking about this specific exam, this specific subject. A better approach is asking, in the past, how long has it typically taken me to prepare for exams of this difficulty? By anchoring your judgment in statistical reality from past experience, you protect yourself from optimistic bias and noisy one-off guesses. Third, delay your intuition. Our minds are built to jump to conclusions and form coherent stories. Fight that urge. Before deciding if you like an idea, person, or plan, force yourself to break it down. Make a simple checklist of the 3 or 4 things that truly matter. Evaluate them one by one. Only then, once you have all facts laid out, should you let holistic intuition make the final call. This simple act of structuring your judgment is perhaps the most powerful hygiene tool of all. That was a summary of Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment by Daniel Kahneman, Olivier Sibony, and Sunstein. We've explored the main ideas today, but I need to be honest with you. A summary, no matter how detailed, can only be a map. The real treasure is found when you walk the territory yourself. This book's true power lies in those quiet reflection moments it provokes, when a particular example makes you rethink a past decision, or a simple phrase suddenly illuminates a flaw in your own thinking. This summary is your guide for deciding if this book deserves your time. If anything we've discussed today sparked your curiosity or challenged your assumptions, I strongly encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning. It's an experience that can fundamentally upgrade your mental software for navigating the world. A link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel, Billionaire's Bookshelf. It helps us reach more curious minds like yours and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.